I guess when I look back, I can't really pinpoint the exact moment it all started. It wasn't like I woke up one day and said, "Hey, I'm going to ruin my life today." No, it was more of a slow burn, a series of little choices I made that eventually led me to where I am now. I've been married to Greg for almost 8 years. We have a house, a dog, and a routine that, on the outside, seems pretty perfect. But inside, things weren't quite as they seemed. I didn't want to admit it at first, but the truth is, I'd been feeling unappreciated for a while. Greg is a great guy, he really is. But after the honeymoon phase ended, we settled into this comfortable, almost predictable life. We didn't fight much, but we didn't really talk either. It wasn't that I didn't love him anymore, I did. But I felt like there was this void in our relationship, this space that neither of us seemed to notice or care about. I tried to fill it with hobbies, work, anything, but nothing seemed to really help. That's when I joined the gym. I know. That sounds like the start of a cliché, but hear me out. I wasn't looking for a new partner. I wasn't even thinking about that. I was just trying to do something for myself, something to make me feel better. The gym was my escape. I started going every day, and over time, I began to notice the trainer, Mark. He was younger than Greg, fit, confident, and had this magnetic energy about him. He always seemed so sure of himself, and I guess that's what initially drew me in. At first, it was all professional. We'd talk about my workouts, and he'd push me to my limits, but it never went beyond that. But there was this lingering tension every time he touched my arm or adjusted my posture during a session. Nothing overtly inappropriate, but enough to make my heart race. He noticed when I was struggling and encouraged me. There was something in the way he looked at me, something that made me feel seen, not just as someone's wife, but as a person in my own right. I won't lie, I enjoyed the attention. I hadn't realized how starved I was for validation until he started giving it to me. At home, Greg didn't notice the little things anymore. He didn't comment on how I looked or how hard I was working to improve myself. I missed that. I missed feeling desired. Over time, the sessions became more frequent. Mark would stay a little longer after hours to chat with me. Sometimes we'd talk about work, other times about life, and eventually, the conversation turned more personal. I didn't think much of it at first, but there was something intoxicating about our interactions. He listened when I spoke, and I could tell he was genuinely interested in what I had to say. I don't know when exactly the line was crossed. I wasn't planning to fall for him. It just happened. One evening, after a particularly grueling workout, Mark asked if I wanted to grab a coffee. It wasn't anything special, but the invitation was different than all the others. We sat down, and the conversation flowed easily. He laughed at my jokes, listened intently, and before I knew it, I felt this magnetic pull toward him. I hadn't felt this kind of chemistry in years, and it felt so alive. That night, we ended up talking until the coffee shop closed. It was innocent at first, but there was this tension, like something was waiting to happen, and I think we both knew it. By the time we said goodbye, Mark had given me a hug, and it lingered longer than necessary. Something in me wanted more. I didn't admit it then, but I knew that night that I was dangerously close to crossing a line. The next few days were a blur. I told myself I wasn't going to do anything. I was married, after all, but I found myself thinking about him constantly. The way he smiled at me, the way he made me feel like I was the only person in the room. I had never felt that way before, not even with Greg, and that's when the guilt started creeping in. But guilt didn't stop me. I convinced myself that it wasn't a big deal. It was just a harmless crush, something that would fade. I was still loyal to Greg, still in love with him, but part of me craved something more. I wanted to feel desired, wanted alive. And Mark was offering that to me, in a way that Greg just wasn't. So I kept going. I kept training with Mark, kept talking to him after hours, kept pretending like everything was fine at home. But deep down, I knew I was playing with fire. I just didn't realize how badly it was going to burn. The worst part was that I felt like I was getting away with it. Every time I saw Greg, I convinced myself that nothing was wrong. I'd kiss him, hold his hand, and go through the motions like everything was normal. And for a while it worked. But it wasn't sustainable. I could feel myself slowly slipping away from Greg, and the more I let myself get wrapped up in the attention from Mark, the more distant I became from my husband. I remember the first time I caught myself daydreaming about Mark while Greg was talking to me. I felt a rush of shame, but then something else. Excitement. And that's when I realized I had crossed a line. I wasn't just physically attracted to Mark anymore. It was deeper than that. He made me feel alive in a way that I hadn't felt in years. And it terrified me. But I couldn't stop. I didn't know how to stop. As time went on, I couldn't deny that things were getting messier. I'd still tell myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. It wasn't like I was cheating, right? At least, that's what I told myself. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just a harmless crush anymore. I was playing a dangerous game, and I could feel myself falling deeper into it with each passing day. Greg, on the other hand, had no idea. He was so wrapped up in his own work that he didn't notice the changes in me. At first, I wasn't sure whether that made me feel relieved or more guilty. It was like I was living this double life. One version of me was the loyal wife, doing her best to keep up appearances, and the other was this woman who couldn't stop thinking about Mark, couldn't stop wanting more. I was torn between the two, and I hated myself for it. One evening, after a particularly long workout with Mark, he walked me to my car like he always did. This time, though, something was different. There was a quiet intensity between us that felt almost palpable. We were standing by my car, and I could tell he was hesitating, like he wasn't sure what to do next. I wasn't sure what I wanted either, but I knew what was coming. "Do you want to grab dinner?" he asked, his voice low and a little strained. I froze for a moment, the guilt rising up in my chest. I shouldn't do this, I thought. I should go home to Greg, do the right thing. But in that moment, the thought of going back to the routine felt suffocating. I was so tired of pretending, of being someone I wasn't. So I said yes. We went to a little Italian place down the road. It was quiet, intimate. We sat in a corner booth, and the moment we sat down, Mark reached across the table and took my hand. It felt like the world slowed down. I remember looking at him and thinking that maybe, just maybe, this was exactly what I needed, what I deserved. The dinner was casual, but every word felt charged. We talked about everything and nothing, our conversation flowing easily, but the whole time, I felt this electric pull between us. Mark was funny, charming, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this alive. And then, without warning, he leaned across the table and kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of uncertainty or hesitation. It was a kiss that said everything I had been trying to ignore for so long. I kissed him back without thinking, without caring. It felt like the floodgates had opened, and all the emotions I had been keeping inside finally burst free. I didn't want to pull away. I didn't want to stop, but I knew I had to. I knew that if I didn't, I'd be crossing a line I wouldn't be able to come back from. So, I pulled back and looked at him, my heart racing. "Mark, this isn't right," I whispered, my voice shaky. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me with those deep eyes of his. But he didn't pull away either. "I know," he said quietly, "but I can't stop thinking about you." And that was it. That was the moment. I knew then that I couldn't walk away from him. Not now. Not when everything about our connection felt so right. For the first time in a long time, I felt wanted. I felt desired. It wasn't just about physical attraction anymore. It was about something deeper. Something I didn't even know I was missing until now. I left dinner that night with a heavy heart, torn between guilt and excitement. As soon as I got in the car, I called Greg to check in. He was fine, of course. Just watching TV and getting ready for bed. I told him I was heading home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. The next few days felt like a blur. I was still seeing Mark at the gym, and our connection was undeniable. It wasn't just physical anymore. We talked more, and every time he touched me, it felt like electricity. I felt like I was on the edge of something, like I was living a life that wasn't mine, a life with him. But I couldn't let myself believe that. I was married. I loved Greg. But with every glance, every touch, I felt more and more like I was slipping away from him. Things at home became more strained without me even realizing it. I was distracted, distant, and I could tell Greg was starting to notice. He kept asking if everything was okay, if I was happy, but I always told him I was fine. I didn't want to tell him the truth. I didn't want to admit what I was doing. One night, after another late workout with Mark, I got home to find Greg sitting on the couch, staring at his phone. He looked up when I walked in, and for the first time in weeks, I saw concern in his eyes. "Hey, is everything all right?" he asked, his voice soft but hesitant. "Yeah, why?" I replied, trying to sound casual. He didn't answer right away, just stared at me for a long moment, like he was trying to figure me out. Then he finally spoke, his tone cold and flat. "You've been acting different lately. I don't know what's going on, but something feels off. Are you sure you're okay?" I froze, the guilt washing over me. It was like he could see right through me, and I had no idea how to respond, so I just shrugged and mumbled something about being tired from work. But inside, I was panicking. Was he starting to suspect? The truth was, I didn't know how much longer I could keep up the act. The weeks that followed were nothing short of a whirlwind. It's like I was living in two different worlds, and each one was slowly pulling me apart. At home, I was still Greg's wife, playing the part. But in my mind, my heart, I was already somewhere else. Every time I looked at Mark, I felt like I was stepping deeper into quicksand. I was drowning in this affair, in these feelings I couldn't control, but part of me didn't want to escape. I was addicted to the rush, to the newness, to the way he made me feel. It wasn't just physical anymore. Mark and I had crossed that line a long time ago. We were talking more than ever, texting constantly when we weren't together. He made me feel seen, in a way I hadn't felt in years. But the worst part was, I wasn't just hiding this from Greg anymore. I was lying to myself too. I had convinced myself that I could keep everything in balance, that I could love Greg, and still want something more with Mark. I told myself it didn't have to mean anything, but it did. It was everything. One evening, after a particularly long session with Mark, I felt like I couldn't ignore it any longer. The guilt was suffocating, but the desire was stronger. We were in the parking lot, standing by our cars. He looked at me, and I could see it in his eyes. He wanted this. I wanted it too, but I wasn't sure how far I was willing to go. The moment felt like a slow motion train crash, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to pull back or throw myself into it. "Am I really the only one feeling this?" he asked, his voice soft but intense. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I just kissed him. I didn't care about the consequences anymore. I didn't care about Greg or the life we built. All I cared about in that moment was the fire between us. After that, I couldn't stop myself. We spent more time together outside of the gym. We'd grab lunch, go for walks, and sometimes we'd just sit in his car, talking for hours. The connection was undeniable. But there was always that little voice in my head, reminding me of Greg, of what I was throwing away. Still, I ignored it. Because when I was with Mark, I felt alive. When I was with Greg, I felt like I was slowly dying inside, and I didn't know how to fix that. It wasn't until one afternoon, when I got home after a particularly heated exchange with Mark, that everything came crashing down. I pulled into the driveway, exhausted and on edge. I walked inside, and there was Greg, sitting at the kitchen table, his eyes locked on me. I didn't know what he knew, but I could tell something was off. There was this tightness in the air, a tension that felt like it was about to snap. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. I froze. My heart was pounding in my chest. I had never seen him like this before. Calm, but with this underlying anger that was almost more terrifying than shouting. For a second, I thought I might pass out from the weight of the moment. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to lie, to pretend everything was fine, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I had reached the point where the truth was inevitable. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, but even I could hear the lie in my voice. Greg didn't buy it. He stood up and walked toward me, and that's when I saw it. His phone, with a text from Mark. The words were clear, but the shock on Greg's face was even clearer. My heart dropped into my stomach. "You think I wouldn't notice?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. I stared at the text. It wasn't anything explicit, but it was enough. Just a simple, "Can't wait to see you again tonight." But it might as well have been a neon sign flashing above my head. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I don't know what to say," I whispered, my throat tight. "I'm so sorry, Greg." He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, his face pale. His eyes were full of hurt, disbelief, and anger. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to find out like this, through a text from the guy I'd been seeing behind his back. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Is this really happening? Greg's voice cracked, and it hit me harder than I expected. After everything we've been through, after all these years, you're just going to throw it all away? I couldn't even look at him. I felt like the worst person in the world. I never meant for this to happen, I said, though it felt hollow. I never wanted to hurt you. But my words were meaningless at that point. He could see the truth now, clearer than ever. He knew what I'd done, and he knew it wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. A choice I had made over and over again. The guilt came crashing down on me, but it didn't change anything. I don't know who you are anymore, Greg said, his voice breaking. I don't know what happened to the woman I married. I wanted to say something, to explain, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and deep down, I knew he was right. The woman he married was gone. In her place was someone who had betrayed him, who had taken everything he had given me and thrown it away for a fleeting feeling. Greg stood up and walked to the door. I didn't stop him. There was nothing I could say, nothing I could do to make this right. As he reached the door, he turned to me one last time, his eyes filled with pain. I can't do this, he said. I'm done. And with that, he walked out. I stood there frozen as the door slammed behind him. I didn't even realize I was crying until the tears hit my cheeks. It wasn't until that moment that I realized just how much I had lost and how much I had destroyed. All the things I thought I wanted, all the things that had seemed so important in the heat of the moment, meant nothing now, and the worst part was, I couldn't even blame anyone but myself. The silence in the house felt suffocating after Greg left. The kind of silence that presses in on you, almost like a physical weight. I stood there, staring at the door, trying to process everything that had just happened. It felt surreal. A few hours ago, I'd been living in my own little bubble, telling myself I could keep everything in balance. But now everything was shattered, and there was no way to piece it back together. I didn't know where Greg went after he walked out. Part of me hoped he would come back, but I knew deep down that wasn't going to happen. He had finally seen through all the lies, the facade I had so carefully constructed. The woman I'd been for the past few years, the one pretending to be happy, pretending to be faithful, she was gone, and in her place was just me, standing in the rubble of everything I'd destroyed. I felt empty. The guilt gnawed at me, but it was different this time. It wasn't the guilt I'd felt when I'd stolen a glance at Mark, or the guilt I'd brushed off when I started spending more time with him. No, this was deeper. This was the kind of guilt that sinks into your bones, the kind that makes you question every decision you've ever made, the kind that makes you wonder if you even know who you are anymore. I didn't know what to do. I called Mark, hoping he could somehow offer me the comfort I needed, but when I heard his voice on the other end of the line, I felt nothing. His words were like background noise. He was asking if I was okay, if I wanted to meet up, but all I could think about was how I had destroyed my life for something that felt so fleeting. How could I have been so selfish? I need some space, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Mark paused, probably sensing the shift in my tone, but he didn't press. I get it, he said, his voice softer than usual. If you need anything, just let me know. And then we hung up. I didn't want to talk to him anymore. Not like this. Not when everything I had thought I wanted was now the thing that had torn my world apart. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I kept replaying everything in my head, over and over again. How I had pushed Greg away, how I had let myself get swept up in the fantasy of what could be with Mark, and how it all came crashing down in an instant. I kept thinking about that look in Greg's eyes when he saw the message from Mark, that mixture of pain, disbelief, and betrayal. I couldn't stop crying. I couldn't stop feeling like the worst person in the world. The next day, I stayed home. I couldn't face anyone, couldn't face Greg, couldn't even face myself. I was spiraling, but I knew deep down that I had to face the consequences of what I'd done. I had to own it. I tried calling Greg, but he didn't pick up. I left him messages begging for forgiveness, but I knew he needed time. I didn't expect him to forgive me right away. Hell, I wasn't sure if he ever would. But I had to try. I had to at least show him that I was sorry, that I recognized the weight of what I had done. Days passed, and the silence between us was deafening. I could feel the walls closing in on me. I knew I was the one who had built them, brick by brick, with every lie and every decision I had made. I felt like I was suffocating, but I also knew I couldn't undo any of it. One evening, after work, I was sitting on the couch, staring at the phone in my hand when it rang. I didn't even need to check the caller ID to know who it was. It was Greg. I held my breath as I answered. Greg. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought he might hang up. But then he spoke, and his voice was flat distant. I'm not coming back, Sam. I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to beg him to reconsider, to tell him that I would do anything to make things right, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. The damage was done. I know. I whispered. I understand. I don't blame you. He sighed, and for the first time in a while, I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. I don't know who you are anymore. I don't know if I ever did. That hit harder than I could have imagined. I wanted to say something, to explain everything, but I knew it wouldn't matter. I had broken his trust, shattered everything we'd built. I had destroyed the person he thought I was. There was another long silence, and then Greg spoke again, his voice barely audible. I need to go. I hope you figure things out, Sam. I really do. But I can't be part of this anymore. And with that, he hung up. I sat there, staring at the phone for a long time, my tears falling freely now. The reality of it all was sinking in. I had lost him. For good. And it wasn't just the marriage that I had lost. It was everything. I had lost the person I used to be, the woman who believed in loyalty, in love, in the life we'd built together. And for what? For a fleeting moment of passion. For the illusion of something better. I didn't know how to move forward. I didn't know if I ever would. But I knew one thing for sure. I would never forget the way I felt when I saw Greg's face that night, when he walked out the door, leaving me with nothing but the wreckage of my own choices. And as much as I wished I could go back and fix it, I knew that the path I had chosen had led me to a place of no return. The only thing left for me now was to try and figure out how to live with the consequences of what I had done.